Okay, so we have the beginning of an application here, our blog app, starting to look okay. The next thing we need to do is we want to be able to get a list of posts from our Node-Express API and render them on our homepage. And so we're going to create a section in our home component here. Below the hero, we're going to create a div with the class name equal to feed. And this is just going to display a feed of posts. And because it's going to display a feed of posts, we should probably pass those posts in like this. I'm going to give it a default argument of just an empty array. And then I'm going to take those posts and I'm going to map over them and take each post, and I want to display something. So let's, for the time being, let's just display a div with a class name equals post preview. And then inside that div, we will render the name of the post. What's it? Post.title. Just like that. And so all we're doing here is we're expecting a list of posts that we're somehow going to get, and then we're going to render them on our page right here, right below this. So anyone can click on them, and then they can be directed to that blog post. So once we have this done, we then can save this, and still works. Nothing's wrong here, but we don't see any data because we haven't actually fetched those posts from our backend yet. And this is where things are going to get a little interesting. So in the app.js file, we're going to want to make an HTTP request as soon as this application is mounted to the screen to go fetch all of the posts from our backend and then pass them to the home component. Now the way we would do that is we're going to save all of the posts in state, and then we're going to fetch those posts, update those posts in state, and then pass them to the home component. Now, if you remember from the last series, we can use state, or what we refer to as data that does change in components. We can say import useState from React. And then we destructure out the state array like so. Const posts set posts equals useState, and we're going to have an empty array here. And then we're going to say posts is equal to posts in the home component. Now again, nothing has changed here because we still have not fetched the actual posts themselves. So how do we go about doing that? Well, the way to do it is by using this Axios package that we downloaded earlier. Import Axios from Axios. Now Axios, we can actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and use it first, and then we'll talk about what it is. Axios is simply a library that allows us to make HTTP requests in the same way that Insomnia or Postman does. So just like this, where we make a GET request to this route, Axios allows us to do the exact same thing. Now, how are we going to be able to get the app to make that request as soon as it mounts to the page? Well, this involves another interesting thing from React called a useEffect. And you can see here there's quite a bit of use hooks available to us in React. The two we're focusing on in this course for the time being are useState and useEffect. And useEffect is another one of the most used hooks in React. Essentially what useEffect does is you pass it a function that runs every time this app renders. So we say useEffect like this, and then we give it a callback function. So this callback function here will run every time this app function is run to generate this JSX HTML. Now inside here, we want to make sure that we make a GET request to our blog API. And what was the route we're looking for? I think it's blog/blog, something like that. Well, we can test it out here. /blog, we want to make this GET request, just like this. We want to make a GET request to the HTTP localhost :3001/blog endpoint. Then we want to take all of the posts that come from that, and we want to set them here, and then pass them to the home component to be rendered onto the screen. Now, I'm going to just write some code here, and then I'm going to explain all of it in a second. So I'm just going to throw a bunch of code on the page. We're going to see it work, and then we're going to talk about what exactly just happened. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a colon after this, and I'm going to pass in a list of dependencies. Now, dependencies tell us when exactly this useEffect hook should run. So essentially what happens here is whatever we put inside here, the code inside this block here, this useEffect block, everything in here runs whenever anything in this array changes. Now you'll notice that I've put nothing inside that array. That is because I want it to run only once and only once. Because there's nothing inside this dependency array, this useEffect hook will run only once as soon as this app component has mounted to the screen. Now inside here I'm going to define a function. Const fetch posts is an async function, and it is going to do two things. It is going to try, catch, and we're just going to console.log the error for now. We can handle this more elegantly later, but for the time being, we just want to make sure as soon as this useEffect hook runs, we want to say const res equals await axios.get, and it accepts a URL, which we actually already know what that URL is. It's this right here. So let's take that. This is the URL, the route that we are requesting. And that's it. That's actually all we need. Then we can say const data equals res.data. Now, if this data exists, if data, we're going to set posts data.posts. And so essentially what's happening here is when this fetch posts function runs, it's going to await a GET request to the localhost 3001 where our API lives to the /blog route. Then it is going to take the response, and Axios, what Axios does is it attaches the data of any response to res.data. Now we know that in our blog API, that in this route here, we send back, when someone asks for the list of posts, we send back a JSON with an object with a single key that is posts. And you can see that here. So this whole thing is going to be what res.data is. And so if we want to get the posts, it would be res.data.posts. However, if there is an error in our application, then res.data will not be a valid key. So we're checking here if data is anything, if it's valid, then set the posts to data.posts. An even easier way might be, let's just say const posts equals res ?data ?posts. Now this weird syntax, if you've never seen it before, and I'm actually just going to use posts here instead. All this does is this optional chaining ? Dot syntax is it says, hey, does res exist? If it does, get data. Does data exist? If it does, get posts. And if any point through this chain, any of this messes up, it'll just give you a null value. It's an optional chaining parameter. And so, or it's not parameter, it's called operator. Excuse me, the optional chaining operator. Get my words mixed up today. So all we need to do here is call this fetch posts function as soon as this app mounts, and it should fetch those posts, set them into state here, and pass them to our home component, which then renders them to the screen. So we'll save this. We'll see if this works. Okay, we have an error. Great. Yeah, and this is, I'm glad we got to this point. So you'll notice here, access to XML HTTP request at this, from origin this, and you'll notice 3001 to 3000 has been blocked by CORS policy. This is exactly what we wanted to see. And we actually already handled this, but we didn't do it in the application itself. We installed this CORS package here because cross-origin resource sharing is, well, again, cross-origin resource sharing has all kinds of issues and is like a relatively complex topic if you want to get into it. But just know that you can handle CORS issues by taking the CORS package and using it as a middleware here. I'm actually not going to go too much into CORS. CORS is a fascinating subject. It is very useful, but for the time being, it's not important to us. So we're going to save this. We're going to come back to our application. We're going to refresh, and we see our first and second post listed here, both fetched from our backend. How do we know they were fetched from our backend? Well, we can go check it out. and we can see that the server, after restarting, just received a GET request to get/blog. If we refresh again, we should see another GET request to the blog. 304, which is to redirect, but the same thing, it worked just the same. And if we check out our network tab, we should see 2 successful requests to get the 2 posts that live within our backend. And so now we have a React front end that is communicating with our Node Express backend via the useEffect hook here, this useEffect hook, which only runs as soon as this app component mounts to the screen. And it calls this fetch posts function, which we defined inside the useEffect hook. It then makes the GET request using the Axios package here, grabs the posts from the response only if they exist, and if they do exist, it sets those posts in state, which are then passed to our home component and rendered to the screen. Now, there is so much going on here. If any of this confuses you, don't freak out. The best way to learn how to do this is just to do it a lot, which we will. But for now, we have something working. This is great. We're going on to the next spot.